Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Policy and Planning Commission meeting today for January 24th, 2019. Today we have three agenda items. Two are going to be public hearings with recommendations, and then the third is going to be a proposal. And those subjects are, the first one is going to be the 2019 docket of proposed comprehensive plans and amendments. Second line item here is going to be proposed amendments to the IMC 18.22 wireless communications facilities. And then the third agenda item tonight is going to be the sign code update project, and that is informational. First order of business today is to go ahead and approve the meeting minutes from December 13th, 2018.
I'd like to move to approve the minutes from December 13th.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion carries, or not motion carries. Minutes are approved, and we will go ahead and go to our first agenda item. And Trish,
Happy New Year.
you here?
Happy New Year.
It's the docket time again. Comprehensive plan amendments. I know you think you just finished with last year's, and you did. And now it's time for the 2019. And so the process is you recommend the established list to council. They establish the list, and then we start working on all the amendments, and we bring them to you at the end of the year, and you make a recommendation to council, and then we start over next year. So you guys are good at this. We do this every year. It's a smaller docket this year, you may have noticed, because we have a lot of other projects in the pipeline for you all. So we tried to scale back if that's possible with you all. 4 of them are annual amendments. The transportation 6-year plan that you do every year, the population and household projections update that we get from the state, the update to the job targets, all those annual pieces that we do, and there's a couple of new ones. As you recall from the Parks strategic plan last year, they had on their work plan that they're going to be updating the tree canopy, and when they get the information back from their work on the tree canopy, it will come to you to see if we need any different policies or different targets for the comprehensive plan policies that we have on the tree canopy. That's going to be a fun one. Also, the Mountains to Sound Greenway, we have some real general policy direction in that, and we want to strengthen that a little bit so it speaks more to our support for that area, so that's listed. It's also in the land use element. So far, we have one community facility parcel that needs redesignation this year, but so far we only have one, so we'll keep you posted on that. If we have questions out to the Parks Department, Public Works, Engineering, and Ops to see if they've purchased any that we need to change the zoning for, so we'll keep you apprised of that. The Central Issaquah plan, you probably heard that we're updating, we're calling overhaul Title 18, which is the land use code. And if there's any pieces that fall out of that have to be cleaned up in the central plan, we're putting this on as a placeholder just so we're able to do that when we need to. Our work on the water plan last year that you so diligently looked at all the new policies, we're thinking of combining part of the utilities and public services plan element with the capital facilities element of the comp plan, because there's a lot of overlap on how they talk about provisions that the city provides. So we're thinking that the comp plan could be more efficient if we actually merge some of those sections and only say them once in the plan. So we're hoping to do that this year. We're going to talk about the treasures. You all had mentioned you wanted to talk about the treasures. We're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, so we're going to have you help us with that. And then again, the capital facilities element, update the level of service. We should be farther along with the fire impact fees, police, general government rate studies, and maybe even parks by the end of the year, so we can amend that element. And the top 9, those are the ones the administration is recommending we do. Yes, sir.
You don't have to turn it on.
Hit that
I thought you
button.
turn on. So the treasures, those aren't currently in
The
plan
treasurers
to-
are currently in, they've been in since 1993.
Okay, so what would the update be? Just,
We're going to look at them again and see, do we still need the treasurers? How do you feel about the treasurers? How do you want to use the treasurers? It's going to be sort of a philosophical conversation with you all first.
okay. Thanks.
They are fabulous, so it's a fabulous list if you haven't looked at them recently.
I've seen the list, but I was, since it said new amendment, for a second I thought it was,
'Cause
that they weren't there.
Yeah, we haven't touched them since 1993.
What would be an example of a treasure?
Oh, there's 35 of them. The Salmon Hatchery, Pickering Farm, the Mist in the Mountains. They're natural and physical. I mean, they're a plethora of items that the community felt in 1993 were valuable pieces of our community that when we grew in 20 years, it was the first thing we did for growth management. They wanted to be sure we still had those when we grew in 20 years. So that was sort of, we wanted to see what made us special. So that was the first step.
Makes Issaquah Issaquah.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun list.
Puts the qua in Issaquah.
There you go, there you go.
Trish, I have a few questions.
Sure.
I know the Green Necklace Plan has some elements that would kind of fit into the transportation element around, paths and things like that. Do we need to call that out in proposed Amendment 1, transportation element, or?
I think we're thinking most of the green necklace piece is going to be in the land use code update because it'll probably be street standards, trail segments. We might need a new trail segment or two new trail segments, but we're thinking all of that is mostly implementation since the bulk of the policy direction went into the strategic plan of parks when you guys help with that. So we're thinking now we just need to get it in code to implement it.
Okay. And then I know we're going to talk about sign code this year.
Yes.
Does that need to be listed?
That's not really a comprehensive
Okay.
plan piece. That's certainly in the land use
More
code.
of a code than a
Right.
comprehensive plan? Okay.
Right.
Got it.
But yeah, that's going to be some fun too.
Trish, I have a question also.
Yes.
To her point, what's the difference between non-motorized routes, route maps, updated reflective DAs, and other potential citywide changes compared to the Green Necklace? Because isn't the Green Necklace a non-motorized route?
Non-motorized routes generally are those that you would use not as recreation. You could use them for recreation, but they're to get from point A to point B. They're not necessarily recreational. And so this set of improvements, some of them are on development agreement maps. Now that we've talked to the applicant, that, the master builder, and said, your community has to have this, this, and this, and then they connect back out to the city plan, so they have to connect. And so we want to be sure that once we're, like with Tallis and Highlands, those were switched last year. Those were the opposite of renewed. We got rid of those two development agreements, and now we have code. We want to be sure that all the development agreements and all those non-motorized pieces that are in them and fit to ours are actually all in the comprehensive plan, not just our part of it, so that anyone looking at our plan could see the continuum of the non-motorized route that we're wanting. Some of it would be our provision, some would be the applicant's provision.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
Because right now they're in two places, and we would like it all in one. Any other questions on the 9 that we're proposing? And there's just one, the 10th one, that is sort of perennially on there. Someday we want to get back to the standards for sustaining places, but not this year. Tonight is your public hearing and discussion on on the 10. And then if you're comfortable to make a recommendation to council, that would be great. Any other questions?
So we're just recommending that this is the stuff that we should cover for the
Right,
year.
because
Okay.
the state only allows us to amend the comp plan once a year. So we establish the list so that, let's say in July, someone comes up and says, hey, we got a comp plan amendment we want you to do. That would have to go on next year's. Any other questions before we open it up? There you are. Did you want to? I know, that's okay.
I ordered this.
Did you want to speak during the public hearing? No. I guess it doesn't look like anyone has signed up. Is there anyone that wants to speak on the docket for the public hearing? Going once, okay. I guess you
Okay,
can
I will
public-
close public hearing then. And then do we want to let Mary Lou Polly speak?
Do you feel comfortable that you can finish this one, or do you want to take a little break from the docket and hear the mayor and then go back to the docket? It's up to you.
Yeah.
Well, what's,
Yes.
I don't want-
Well,
is she going to speak on the docket? Or-
No, she has her own comments.
Oh. Well, maybe we should just wrap up the docket while we're on it.
It's on it.
we'll wrap up with the docket.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
I don't have any comments. I think
I think we just peppered you with our questions.
Okay. So a motion?
So we're going to, do I hear a motion to approve?
I would like to move to approve the 2019 docket for the proposed comprehensive plan amendments.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Oh, no, yeah, sorry.
Just 1 through 9, right?
Yeah, so I did think of one question. Can you briefly speak to, for item number 1, how does that relate to the work that the new transportation, I call the commission, but the advisory board, is the work they're going to do going to impact this iteration of the TIP, or are they more looking forward towards next year? I'm just curious about the interplay.
I'm not sure. I know you're going to be working on the master mobility plan, but I'm not sure what other pieces you're going to be working on, to
Okay.
tell you the truth.
All right. Okay.
I'm sure we've covered whatever it is in the
Okay.
comp plan piece. Hopefully.
All right, so we'll
Sorry.
backtrack. Do I hear a second?
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, taken.
Do we need to say just 1 through 9, or was that?
I think it would be helpful just to
Okay.
make it on the record.
I would like to amend my motion to clarify amendments 1 through 9 will be covered in 2019. And does our second agree?
Like to second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries
Nice.
for the 2019 docket of proposed comprehensive plan amendments.
Perfect. I would like to invite the mayor up to say some wonderful things. I'm going to get out of the docket so it doesn't. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Trish. My name is Mary Lou Polly. I am the mayor of the city of Issaquah, and I want to thank Trish for my patience. There are a lot of things going on in town tonight. There is some strategic plan, deep dive meetings going on, and I'm trying to run between the different buildings, so I apologize that I'm late. I just wanted to come tonight and say thank you to all of you for volunteering for the city and the Planning Policy Commission. I think we don't come out often enough and face-to-face to talk with you and say thank you for the work that you do. The commission is actually 35 years old. This Planning Policy Advisory Board advises both the mayor and the council, providing guidance and direction for Issaquah's future growth. Most of the work that you do has to deal with the city's comprehensive plan and any other related land use documents. So you are a bit of our research and fact-finding group that helps us constantly think about how we're growing, if we're growing in the right way, and how we'd like to change it. And I'm not sure if the public realizes that you are volunteers, that you are unpaid, that you have given up your private time, your family time, social activities to spend evenings with our staff, listening to the information and having thoughtful conversations about how we want to grow. I think it's also probably not apparent to many members of the public that while you're sitting here and being thoughtful and having conversations tonight, you had to do your homework beforehand. And so one of the things I really appreciate is the amount of time that you spend in reading the materials that staff prepares, asking follow-up questions, and really being ready when you come tonight to have a great debate. So on behalf of our community, I want to thank you for all of your service and all that you do. We have in the past done board and commission hospitality events, and we're hoping to do one this year as well. It's really fun when we get members from different boards and commissions interacting, because you just sort of play off each other, and the energy in the room is absolutely astounding. So I don't have any details, but we are hoping to do that this year. So thank you for volunteering, and thank you for all the hard work you do for our community. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Mary Lou Polly.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, next order of business is a public hearing for proposed amendments to the IMC 18.22 wireless communications facility. And Keith, take it away.
Excuse me. Good evening, Commissioners. Keith Niven, Director of Economic Development and Development Services. So I'm going to start by just griping a little bit. So, you know, when we enact a new code, a new chapter for the city's land use code, my hope is that we don't have to come back and change it within a year. But here we are, so I had to get that off my chest. The second thing is I really take pride in working hard to make sure that what we bring you makes our community better. I'm not sure this is that. But what this is basically us responding to an order by the Federal Communications Commission to facilitate the implementation of 5G telecommunications. And in so doing, there was an order that localities do some things with their codes to make sure that happens. And so the amendments that are being proposed at this time are in response to the FCC order. I included this in my presentation. I'm not going to read it. You're welcome to if you want. It's an op-ed from the mayor of San Jose, and it addresses why localities are unhappy about what the FCC did, because it really takes away a lot of our local authority, and I think we're not super excited about that. So this was published in the New York Times, and I just thought it was a good summary of what's going on. So I'm going to take a break for a second and just say I think what the administration is going to recommend for this evening is that you open the public hearing, you take public testimony from anyone who would like to give it, but that we leave it open and continue the public hearing until February 14th. Because we received a number of comments from the wireless carriers late this afternoon, as late as 4:50, I believe was the latest one we got. So obviously staff haven't had time to evaluate those, and as you remember, hopefully from the last time we did this dance, we really tried to work through most of those language and nuance issues with the carriers so that what ultimately came to the commission for recommendation, there was as few points of disparity as possible. And I think we'd like to take the same philosophic approach this time. And because we haven't had a chance to really digest those comments and address them, my recommendation is I'm going to go through a couple of the bigger changes and then open the public hearing. I'll answer any questions you guys might have tonight, but I think we really should continue this till the 14th. So the major changes, one of the biggest changes coming from the FCC order was we cannot prohibit the installation of facilities to complete the networks that they're trying to build. And as you remember, what we did in our siting criteria is we created encouraged locations, discouraged locations, and then prohibited locations. And so, and Daniel Kenny from Ogden Murphy Wallace is here too if we have any legal questions to answer. And so what we've done is we've added a deviation section. And what that allows is, so if they need to install a new facility and the encouraged locations won't work for them from a technical reason and the discouraged won't, and the only place that will is a prohibited location, now there's a process where they can go through to say, here's why we have to go here. An example would be, if you remember, for new macro towers, we prohibited them in single-family zones. If they came back and said the only way we can provide coverage is to place a new macro tower in a single-family zone, our new code would allow that to potentially happen. The second piece is the...
Sorry, Keith, on
Yes,
that
sir.
one. So where's the new language that walks through that process? Are you going to walk through
I
these?
knew you were going to ask that. It is section 90. I believe so the deviation, I think, is 90C. Doing that from memory. My lawyer's nodding. Am I close?
Yeah, you're correct.
Sweet. Look at
Very
that. So that's the new. So there's criteria, and and one of the comments we got was to massage that criteria language. Least intrusive, which you'll see under number 2. That's a phraseology that we can't use because of litigation. So we're working on a different way to say the same thing. So think about it this way. What we're trying to do is let's assume that a carrier wants to put a macro tower or even a small cell tower, a small wireless facility in a residential area. Let's say it's a private street, so it's going to have residential zoning, and they say we need to do it there because otherwise we can't get coverage to those back lots. Okay, great. I would like to have a conversation with the carrier about, can we put that pole like not right across from the bedroom windows of the guy across the street, right? So that he wakes up every day and looks at that thing. If we could move it 10 feet to the north, maybe it's behind a tree, and that would be a great thing to do. So that least intrusive thing in my mind gives us still a little bit of a ability to move it around on the property to try and minimize the nuisance effect if it goes in somewhere where we otherwise thought it shouldn't go. So we're working on that language. The second piece on here, 36410.
Oh, no. Sorry,
Did I
Keith.
not answer your question?
No, well, you did, but then I read it, so then I have another question. So in
That's not allowed.
So we, sorry. So
They're asking the questions.
I'm of course kidding.
so 2 questions. One, do you think that the city staff has or will have the necessary resources to be able to have that technical conversation? Can you speak to that?
So the code right now allows us to hire a consultant. So to get through the first 2 pieces, which is they couldn't put it in the encouraged location and they couldn't put it in the discouraged location, the carrier is going to have to provide a technical report, okay? And so I don't know anything about radio frequencies. Well, I kind of do, but not to where I could like read a report on it and understand what it's saying. So we're going to have to hire somebody to say, look, is this legitimate? And assuming the answer is yes, then we go down that next rung on the ladder. So I think the city will be able to access the technical expertise we need to be smart about implementation of the code.
And then who pays for that report? They do.
Well, they pay for the report and they pay for our review of the report.
Okay, so there's no financial burden on the city.
We're going to get to that in 364010,
Okay.
The second line. So the next thing the FCC said is, so cities, you can't extract a huge permit fee for these applications. Here's what you should charge. But what they also said is, these are like the standard fees unless you can demonstrate it costs you something else. And so what so we've already been to infrastructure committee as an informational conversation, so I floated this to them as well. I think where the council is pointing right now, and this is some fodder for you guys to think about for our next discussion, is the administration right now has kind of changed what we think we want to do. We're actually going to recommend going to time and materials for these specific applications. So we will track our time to make sure that the city recovers full burdened cost of reviewing these permits.
So that's what I was going to get to. So then because for most this is hopefully relatively straightforward, but there's one where you do get into some sort of technical dispute, and all of a sudden it requires hours of time to move something 10 feet. That would be covered.
The next one, so these all feed on each other.
Okay.
The next one, so we had said in the initial code that they could consolidate 10 new facilities in one permit. Right? We figured, okay, street, you can get 10 new antennas, that can be one permit, and we'll review that for the fee that we had in the code. FCC said, no, they could do the whole city in one permit. Okay, so now we're talking about a lot more time to review that permit because it just got a lot more complicated, right? And so a lot of it has to do with how they choose to apply for permits. But the way that the FCC order was written, it kind of opens the gates for it to be something that could be really time-consuming from a city's standpoint. So what we're suggesting in the new red line of the code, which you guys don't have yet, would be to go to time and materials where they would basically post a $2,000 deposit that we would then charge against, and it's clear that if we run out, they would have to then post another deposit until we get the permit issued.
Will there be a mechanism if they do like a full city application, or they do all of that, and then we do the analysis, and there's maybe 2 or 3 that we want to dispute, but the rest are just fine? Is there a way to break that apart, or they have to handle the whole permit all at once?
Super great question. I'm not ready to answer that question since it's dealing with disputes.
Sure, yeah.
But we
'cause
could probably,
it'll be.
might
good
want to
have-
talk to my lawyer about that before I provide an answer on
Fair enough.
TV.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you don't have to answer that, but just because I won't be
Yeah.
here at the next meeting. It'll be good to do something, because I can see how there could easily be 1 or 2 antennas that then become a sticking point.
Right.
And the rest are just fine, and you don't want, it just seems, it seems better to be able to bifurcate those, and then to get in some sort of technical dispute around one specific spot, but then kind of let the rest move forward with no unnecessary delays.
My hope would be that the applicant and the city could negotiate that as an outcome, right?
Yeah,
Because I think
presumably, yeah.
that's in both best interest.
But I don't want to be in a position where they're speaking out of depth, so I don't have a lawyer that I can call. Is that I don't want to be in a position where like they've got, where they're like, oh, well, we have 1,000 antennas and you're holding
Right.
it up because of just one.
Right.
Be able to be like, well, no, those are different discussions.
Right.
That we have the permanent language that allows us to do that.
I'll
Just a thought.
think about that as I go through this with their comments. So the next one is the shot clock. So shot clock is, it's a term that was coined by the FCC. It relates to how long we get to issue the permit. And so the shot clocks have been reduced, as you can see from the numbers that are up on the screen. And the shot clocks also kind of start earlier. So, worst case scenario, the permits got a lot more complicated because now they're more than 10, and our time that we have to issue them has gotten shorter. So, we haven't had any applications yet. So, we adopted this code like 10 months ago or so, and not yet. Verizon and AT&T just got franchise agreements approved in the city. So the next step for them would be to make applications for the actual antennas. Yes, sir?
Do we have an on-call contract or anything that we're going to have stood up to do the technical work needed, since work might all of a sudden just show up real quick?
Not at the moment. Do you know any people that do like RF technical reviews?
I do not.
That is something we should start working on. I'm gonna ask Emily to take the lead on that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to do your guys' job, but
No, it's a great suggestion.
You don't want to, given the tighter shot clock, you don't want to burn half your clock just going through procurement for
No,
an on-call
absolutely.
contract or whatever.
And then the last item is, remember we talked about all the cabinetry and equipment that goes with it. That the size of what's allowed increased from 17 cubic feet to 28 cubic feet.
I have a question. So, let's just take Old Town for an example.
Yes, sir.
How many of these small towers or small cells could we expect to see?
We don't know the answer to that. And a lot of it, and maybe some of the carriers will want to address that. My understanding is it's a capacity issue, right? So they're going to put up antennas, and the antennas are intended to stream more data to users, right? And so it's demand driven. So if let's say Old Town becomes a hub for people streaming Netflix, you're going to see a lot more antennas per, block than you would in another part of town where maybe people aren't on their wireless devices or their mobile devices streaming data. It's demand driven, I think, is my understanding.
So let's assume everyone in Old Town likes to stream Prime and Netflix at the same time. So worst case scenario, based on how many carriers we have T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon Wireless, and AT&T, so 4 carriers.
And Comcast.
And Comcast.
Yeah. And they don't share.
Yeah.
Right, so they don't share. So we could be seeing potentially 5 boxes on every single telephone pole in Old Town or more. I mean, if we're talking about some of these restrictions and it's only like 12 in Old Town, then
Yeah.
maybe it's not such a big deal. But if we're seeing, on every telephone pole, then all of a sudden this is a really big deal that the public has no clue about.
So, yes, we have put some design standards in code now. I think that, when we start to see the deployment, it may very well be that we want to come back and readdress the design pieces of the boxes, because the boxes are, we don't have the ability to say you can't put that 28 cubic, that 3 by 3 by 3 cube, out there at the base of a light pole. It's right here. 28 cubic feet is kind of 3 by 3 by 3, more or less, a little bit less, but. If you remember from last time, the carriers need a certain amount of vertical separation between antennas. And so you're not going to get 5 carriers on one pole. What's going to happen is, because we still have a certain maximum that the pole can be above what's there now. So a replacement pole can be 15% bigger than the one that's there now, right, up to a certain height. And so you may end up with 2 carriers that would be on one pole. So that's 2 antennas and 2 boxes, two beer fridges down at the bottom. But then the 3rd carrier who wants to go there is either going to have to be across the street, or they may have to put their own pole in, because there's not enough vertical separation for them to also be on that same pole. So to answer your question, if you're wanting to know what this is going to look like 10 years from now, I have no idea. We can't use last year and say, well, nothing's happened, so in 10 years, nothing's going to be changed. There will be new facilities, new boxes, new antennas. I just don't know how many. I don't think anybody does. I don't think they can answer that question either if you want to pose it to them when they come and speak. I think we're going to have to kind of keep track of this. And as stuff gets put in, if we need to come back and revisit code, then that's what we'll do.
So a question here is, do we have the ability to say we want to hold off on deployment or issuing permits until we see samples from other cities so that we don't make mistakes?
So the FCC order went into effect this month. So if T-Mobile came in, then correct me if I'm wrong, but if T-Mobile came in tomorrow and wanted to deploy, and we said, yeah, no, we're not ready, or no, you got to comply with our code that we enacted before the FCC rules, they would have grounds to litigate against, I assume, against our non-compliance with the FCC order. So
Even during pending litigation that the city is involved in?
So a stay was not granted. So the localities made a motion for a stay, or like an injunction to hold off on implementation of the order. That was denied. by the 10th court, but it got sent to the 9th court. Do you want to do this? This is not my world. Do you want to talk about
I
the?
can just briefly talk to it.
All right. Because I was just making stuff up.
So,
Don't tell him that.
Daniel Kenny with Ogden Murphy. So our firm's actually not representing the city on that litigation. They joined a larger group. So I am not like totally versed on that. But the stay was requested both at the FCC and in that piece of litigation, and it was denied. So we have. The order is in place as of earlier this month, and the city needs to comply with that and needs to address the code. I think maybe you were speaking more to kind of like a moratorium, which we cannot do. So I would say that for better or worse, industry has been slow to make a permit application. That's probably been good so that everybody can work through the FCC's order, because that came out before the new year. But then also, as Keith said earlier tonight, it would have been nice to get one to see how it all works, right? To work through it. To some extent, that sets the table for what can be done later for competitive equity issues. So like I said, it's kind of good and bad. But should they come in, it would be processed consistent with the FCC order and consistent with code to the extent that it can.
So
Go ahead.
on those ideas, we're obviously not the only city that's going to be dealing with this, and we're probably one of the later stages for where they're going to want to be. Like, they're going to want to do this in Seattle first because there's going to be more people and more density. Do we have any sense of whether or not those applications have come into other cities? Whether there's a timetable, anything?
Small wireless facilities have been installed in other cities. I think a lot of the photos we shared with you guys last time were from the Bay Area. I think the difficult thing is, are they installing them in other cities locally now? I assume they are. I'm looking at my friends out in the audience. They're all looking blank. I think, I don't know where the question's going, Lindsay. I think, every city's code's a little different. Ours, we spent a lot of time on pole heights and on whether or not they can put their facilities on municipally owned poles. We are, I can say, pretty much an outlier in how we responded to like that particular issue. Most other cities, put them on city poles. Now, a lot of it has to do with the city, and some cities see this technology as a boost to their economic development. And so you've got places that, would, invite the carriers to, deploy away because we would love to have broadband because we don't have it now. Like I'm talking maybe places in the Midwest or something where maybe they're less technologically advanced than we are. And I don't mean that in a bad way. That really came out bad. I'm not judging. I'll just be quiet at some point. I don't know. I'm surprised we didn't get any. So Verizon seemed really poised to, and they did actually put a small cell or a few up on Issaquah Falls City Road. So some of the PSE power poles going from here to Sammamish on Issaquah Falls City Road, they did put some small cells on that. But it's been cricket since, and I would have expected we would have gotten something else because it seemed like the carriers were closer to wanting to deploy than maybe they were.
I was just wondering basically when we're going to see something post FCC ruling, particularly when we're looking around like the equipment size and things like that.
So that was one of the questions from Infrastructure Committee. They wanted some photos of, can we see some photos of 17, cubic feet versus 28 cubic feet, just to get a sense for like what this is going to look like. Not that we can do anything about it because we have to live with the 28, but there was that question asked. My friend on my left volunteered to try and find some of those photos, so we are going to try and hopefully get some so that you guys can see these.
I believe T-Mobile sent one. Right? Those were those shrouds
I don't remember.
in the email.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't look.
Oh, that was in our
One this
email.
afternoon.
We got one this evening that looks like.
Yeah, I'm not ready to talk about those tonight.
I'm really fearful of what this is going to look like deployed into our city. And I'm sure that I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of people, because we don't, it's not that we're, not that it's a risk, it's that I'm fearful of what the impact will be visually. And then, on the other hand, you have the health concerns of what is all this wireless magnetic
Radio frequency.
radio frequencies, thank you, is going to do on potential health, because we're going to have these things maybe in our backyards.
So, I hear all that, and I want to try and ask the commission to focus the conversation that we're going to have on the proposed changes. And to some extent, Ron, I can say, well, we said we were going to prohibit them in single family, and now we can't do that. So you're right. It could end up closer to your bedroom window than it could prior. But if there are issues that the commission want staff to address, as it relates to the FCC responsiveness to the FCC order and how we have to change our code. So for example, if we need to relook at the design piece of the code and see if we thought we got it right. Now the problem is, as both Daniel and I said, we haven't had any go in. So it's hard to know whether the parameters that we set initially were set in the right space. But we can really look at that. At the end of the day, we're going to have to see some of these deployed and see how our code reacts to them before I think we're going to know whether we got it right or not. But I think we're willing to look at, if there's sections of code that you want us to go back and look at in terms of like the design piece of this, just let us know. We'll do that.
So I've got a design question. So we've spoken a lot about height and bulk and density is not the right word, but how close they are to each other. Are we allowed to prescribe things like color?
Yeah, we did,
Okay.
actually.
Can you refresh me of where we landed on that? Sorry.
There's a design section. It's.
I was thumbing through and I couldn't.
I'm going to say it's 100. Again, back to section 100. And it says basically, so I'm going to refresh your memory, hopefully. The problem is we have a ton of different poles in the city, right? We've got orange poles, they're kind of orange, downtown. We've got green poles in Highlands. We've got black poles in Tallis. And so part of when we were drafting the code, what we wanted to do was to say, okay, if you're going to put a new pole in, we want it to kind of match the street furniture of the area that you're going to locate, right? And so color, I think, was written to match nearby, like pole elements.
And then, so I guess my question is, then those types of prescriptions, those aren't under dispute with the order. Those are still.
They are not. So so think about it this way. What the order wanted to do, and Daniel, if you want to add some, feel free to push me aside. What the order said is localities, you can't prohibit them, and you can't make a arbitrary set of guidelines for them to follow. In other words, you can't make it so impossible to navigate the permit process that they can't get permitted. And so we can be, as long as we're explicit in our requirements, and they have to be reasonable. You can't say, they all have to be stainless steel. That may be reasonable, I don't know. But you have to have a reason and a rationale. And as long as it's clear, I think we're within our bounds. Now my lawyer's going to talk.
Yeah, so the aesthetic standards have to be published and made generally available. That doesn't necessarily need to be in the code, but we've put them in the code. So as long as those are out there and they know kind of what the rules of the game are, those are fine. And then the new standard that was basically put out is a materially inhibit effective prohibition. So when they're going to look at things like the aesthetic standards or the encourage, discourage, and prohibit, the argument that they're going to make, and you'll see it in some of the comments, is that is something that if you put that regulation upon us or that restriction upon us, it will materially inhibit our ability to provide this service. We would likely disagree with some of those assertions, though if there's something in here that does that, we've tried to change some of that, and that's one of the reasons why the deviation was put in there, so that you can never say that you're materially inhibiting our opportunity to provide service to 14 houses at the end of a private drive, because you now have an opportunity to do that. The language, like Keith was saying, we're going to fine tune that a little bit to make sure that those trigger words aren't in there. But the whole idea is we're not going to do that. Now, whether or not, an aesthetic standard that says that it should be colored similar to the pole that it's replacing or the poles in the area, in my view, would never be materially inhibiting their ability to provide their service. So really, what's the argument? Now, if you said that it had to be a certain type of paint that's $10,000 per gallon, they might say, listen, we can't do that for all of our poles. And that's obviously on the absurd side.
If we get to a back and forth, both parties have made arguments and we're at an impasse, is this handled in arbitration, or how do we legally move forward or continue to fight it?
So we can adopt whatever code we want, right? We have the local authority to do that. If there is a legitimate conflict with the FCC order, obviously we're going to be at risk for future litigation. And so obviously we're not going to want to do that if at all possible. So that's why my recommendation was to open the hearing, take public comment, and then let staff and the providers try to work through as many issues as we can. It would be great to only have a couple that we're maybe not on the same page over. And then we'll talk about what they want and what we think is right and why maybe we didn't agree on that issue. And then you guys get to ultimately make a recommendation to the council. You may say, you know what, I think staff were not right. I think you should agree with the providers on this one because it makes sense. Or you might say, no, we agree with staff and here's our recommendation, council. And then the council makes that decision.
Is every proposed amendment here based on the FCC notification or their
It's a new order that just came
Yes.
into an effect.
Because we didn't, again, we didn't have anything to test the code with to say, oh, and hey, here's some other things we'd like to fix because they didn't work very well with the first application. So all of what's in red line is based on the FCC order.
And that's in the other direction. If there's stuff that we landed on when we did this last year and it's not being changed, we should feel confident that that's all good with the order from what we've seen so far.
I'm relying on Ogden Murphy to tell us if we had some other sections that should have been addressed. And I'm sure the carriers will let us know if they think there's some areas that we missed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think you'll see in the comments two things. One, an attempt to rehash old conversations for the purposes of changing the structure of how we did it before. And so I would encourage focusing on the FCC-related stuff. And then also, I mean, obviously, industry is going to have their own perspective and opinion on what would materially inhibit their service. And there's going to be a selection of those that they're going to make that argument on. And there's a few of those that, in theory, could change every single time they change the design of their device. So, I mean, in my opinion, how do you keep up with that from a city's perspective if the box needs to look a certain way and something about the regulation changes? So clearly, they will have their own opinions on what sections in the code should be changed or need to be changed for the FCC order. We had ours. We'll talk about those and we'll hash those out as best we can for the next time it comes to you so that you have a clearer understanding of really what you need to be looking at. And then, of course, if the ones that we've hashed out, you have opinions on, then of course.
But any remaining gaps, you'll just walk us through those.
Yeah. And we'll do, what I can envision for next time will be kind of like a matrix, which will be, here's their comment, and either we agreed with it and made the change, and here's the change, or we disagreed with it, and here's why we disagree with it. And that way, that'll be a good tool for you guys to use as a conversation point for next time.
So is every proposed amendment where the city has agreed with the FCC ruling?
Well, no, nobody said that. We haven't agreed with the FCC order. We are proposing to change our ordinance to come in compliance with the FCC order because we feel like that's our dutiful responsibility. Now, if ultimately the localities win in their lawsuit and part of the order gets reversed, we would be back to deal with this code again probably because like I said at the beginning, I'm not sure these are community benefiting changes. These were to come in compliance with the order to reduce our exposure to litigation.
So this is an intermediate solution until the lawsuit is finalized?
If it changes, yes.
So Keith, you said that our city's approach was kind of an outlier in regards to our focus on right-of-way and city-owned poles and all of that. Does that suggest that you've looked at other cities' code? And is there anything that we should learn from that that we might also want to add in while we're doing the FCC review?
So my suggestion would be no, because I think we did. So think about it in terms of a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum is, I think, high design, aesthetic controls, very regulated. On the other side of the spectrum is none of that. And there are cities that are over here that, the right-of-way is, they don't care what color their poles are. They don't care if their poles match. They don't care if there's a new macro tower, going in on the street corner. That's not us. We're closer to this end of the spectrum, and I think we have probably a lot more regulations. If you remember, we started, our code started as a bit of a mirror of Redmond, because after looking at, I probably looked at like 36 codes. That was the one that resonated the most with me. So we started there, and then it started to unpack from that. And, Redmond's allows antennas on municipal poles. We don't, because that was a big deal for this community and our Public Works Operations Department. So ours is very different, and I think it's fairly tight, and I think it was a good code. So
Question for you, Keith. I think when we start rolling this thing out, we're going to have I don't know if it'd be a public outcry, but I think there's going to be a lot of very passionate concerns about how we roll this out and what it looks like, because we are very protective of our visual landscape.
Yep.
And does the city have a program or a campaign that they're thinking about of engaging the public to help inform of some of these potential changes that could be coming?
Well, so, I don't know.
Did I just ask you to put together a giant committee to engage the public? Yes.
So, the part of it is, again, I don't know that any of us have a good sense for what this is going to look like. If the first application came in where their recommendation was to install 20 new poles on Gilman Boulevard because the existing poles don't work, and they can't go on municipal poles, that would be a big deal. The community would notice that. My guess is it's not going to unfold that way. Now it could. I could be completely wrong. My guess is there'll be some deployment in little clusters, maybe, and then they'll add to that. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So I will think about that, and maybe we can talk about that again in a couple weeks.
Okay.
Okay.
I just,
Good.
you know,
Ready?
it's not just me, but I think there's
Yeah,
going to be a lot
no.
of people coming into your front door, and they're going to be really upset.
Yeah, could be. Definitely different neighborhoods would react differently. So I'm going to step aside and maybe we
You open
let the
this to
public.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and open this to public comment. And we have a sign-up sheet. We should-
Or you can just
Anyone,
call them up. I don't think anyone signed it.
has anyone signed it?
I'll leave it here so they can sign up after they speak.
Okay, so if we go ahead and come on up and then let us know who you are. Thank you for coming.
Good evening. My name is Linda Atkins. I'm an attorney with Davis Wright Tremaine, and I'm here tonight representing T-Mobile. I wanted to call your attention to a letter that I submitted to the Planning Policy Commission, which I think Trish routed to all of you. And in response to some of the questions about what will these look like when they're actually constructed, there is one picture in the attachment to my letter of an installation on a light pole in Las Vegas. So each one of the providers has a different types of equipment that are optimized for their particular networks. For T-Mobile, this enclosure here, so we call this a unified enclosure. And in that enclosure, the antennas and the radios, all of the equipment are concealed inside that box. It's roughly 3 cubic feet. And in this light pole installation, all of the cabling is inside the pole. And T-Mobile is working to use this particular unified enclosure pretty much uniformly as it's rolling facilities out. So, just in terms of the T-Mobile form factor, you could expect something similar to this. My letter really hits 3 points about the ordinance that's in front of you today. And I guess I'd like to preface my remarks by noting that when your amendments to your code, your ordinance that was designed to address small wireless facilities, so that was completed in May of 2018. So we didn't have this FCC order at that time. And some of the comments that I'm making in my letter really relate to decisions that the FCC made when it issued its order and regulations that it's adopted since May. So that would be one of the reasons why you'll see me commenting in part that I think that there's at least one section of what was adopted in May that probably does need to be revisited in order to be in compliance with the order. So to just briefly call your attention to the comments in my letter, the first one is it's more of a technical comment, but it does have a substantive component. It has to do with the antenna definition. So the one that's in this proposed amendment, the first paragraph of that definition it's exactly tracking the FCC regulations, and that's what we as T-Mobile would recommend. There are 3 subsections that have to do with identifying some additional volumetric standards for whip antennas and omni antennas, and we would recommend that those be deleted because they're a little bit at cross purposes with the definition of a small wireless facility that the FCC adopted. So the FCC's definition of a small wireless facility says that each antenna is limited to 3 cubic feet in volume, and then there's a total 28 cubic feet, which applies to antennas and equipment. And so, we think it's not necessary to have these additional volumetric standards, and I think they're a little bit at cross purposes because that 28 cubic feet is cumulative, and it gives the provider the flexibility to design and deploy equipment that fits within that total volumetric limitation without having to deal with so many individual limitations on different pieces of the equipment, and which sometimes can complicate the facility design.
So my second comment relates to the definition of a completely concealed facility in this draft. And the comment really is just to ask that the commission clarify that definition so that we don't have any doubt that T-Mobile's unified enclosure would be considered to be a concealed facility. And my third comment, so this has to do with 1820-090. And that's a section that establishes siting criteria. The first part is siting criteria for macro facilities. And then the second part in subsection B is a list of criteria, siting criteria for small wireless facilities. And the issue here, so the FCC has said that whatever regulations you adopt cannot materially inhibit the provision of wireless service. And part of that is it's addressing the issue of establishing a level playing field so that wireless providers who are attempting to improve the service that they provide to the community are not being forced to comply with a host of regulations that other utility providers don't have to comply with. And in particular, so B, subsections 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, so this is like a hierarchy that you have to go through for every small cell node. So small cells typically are deployed in a group called a polygon. And the purpose of that group of small cells, they all communicate back to a macro tower, and they help to handle all the data traffic that is going to and from that macro tower. And when the engineers design and lay out these polygons, they're looking at how to optimize the locations of the individual nodes in the polygon so that it most efficiently and effectively handles that traffic. Every one of the providers, of course, has their own FCC licensed frequencies, and all the networks they're designed differently. If they're going to have capacity issues, they're going to be in different areas. So that's a partial answer to the question that some of you have about, well, are we going to see a whole bunch of these boxes on the same pole or a whole bunch of these boxes in the same place? Each network is individually designed, and the engineers that are operating that network are looking to optimize their particular network. So, there may be some overlap, but maybe not as much as we might all be concerned about. So the issue here is, so we've got kind of a complicated network design project when the engineers are laying out these polygons, and to require a provider to essentially analyze 5 different types of locations within 150 feet of the proposed location for each node in the polygon. So there might be, anywhere maybe between 5 and 20 nodes in a polygon. It becomes very impracticable, and it also is imposing, I think, enough burden that we have a concern that this may run afoul of the materially inhibit prohibition. And I mean, the last thing that T-Mobile or any other provider wants to do is to get in some kind of a legal argument with the city. We really don't want to do that. What we're trying to do is to improve the service that we provide to the community. And we want to try to, walk down that path together with you and not be arguing about it. And so our request is, with respect to this hierarchy, which
was established before the FCC order came out, so none of us had the benefit of that language, that maybe we revisit that together and see if there's a way to fine-tune the design guidelines in the ordinance so that it's giving you the comfort that you're seeking, that if we're asking to locate on a particular type of pole or in a particular area of the city, that the design guidelines that are appropriate to that pole type or that area of the city are tailored to give you the comfort that you're seeking about aesthetic effects. I think that concludes my comments, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them, either now or later.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Good evening. My name is Greg Bush. I'm a program manager at Wireless Policy Group, and I'm here tonight on behalf of AT&T. I understand that our comments were submitted fairly late, and our red lines were as well. So what I did was I printed out the letter that we emailed. May not have time to forward it to everyone. So who would be the...
You can just give it here, but yeah, we did forward them after you sent them to us. Thank you.
So to sum up what's in the letter, AT&T's concerns fall under two categories. First is that we still have the same concerns from last year when the code was adopted, that with regards to the prohibition of co-locating on municipality-owned poles and decorative poles, and the prohibition of going in the front street right-of-way at all, that does make it more difficult to adequately serve the area. And it's also a business decision of how difficult it is to site in Issaquah, period. As my colleague said, it does become difficult when the application requirements are more burdensome than in other jurisdictions. It becomes essentially more difficult not only for AT&T, but for our site acquisition teams. It takes longer to get approved. We have to do a lot more groundwork to evaluate alternatives, so that makes deployment slower as well. And the second concern we have is compliance with the FCC order, which is in light of the more difficult nature of, essentially, we have only the ability to go on utility poles or to try and place new poles. That makes it harder to comply with the order. And with the siting criteria in the code, there's a deviations that allows us to say, okay, staff, we understand this doesn't fully comply with the code, but with the deviations in section 182290C, there are some criteria that say, okay, here are some guidance for staff, and if we follow these, we can fit these sites in this location. AT&T understands what staff and council are going for with the criteria, as in what our red lines proposed was, just comply with the FCC order and use the language in the order. But to give guidance to staff, it's harder to prove a negative than to say, okay, here are the positive points. Like if you follow these three things, then that's okay to have a deviation. That we would like to work with staff and council over the next few weeks to have a few better points for the deviation guidelines. So to sum up, AT&T still has concerns over the difficulty and prohibition of going on Front Street and the inability to go on municipality-owned poles, and we'd like to provide additional comments in the red lines to ensure compliance with the FCC order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Devendra Maharaj with Verizon Wireless. Thank you, commissioners and city staff, for the opportunity to speak with you today. Verizon appreciates the city taking the time to address each of the technical changes listed on our comment letter, which was sent to you earlier today. If we can just breeze through them really quickly, there's only 6 of them, and I will keep them very short. The first one is about the shot clock restarting. It's just to address that only applies to small wireless facilities. Number 2 would be that could be read to prohibit that small wireless facilities in the right-of-way from single-family residents. We wanted to just clarify that we are not placing them on single-family residents, but they can be in the right-of-way in a residential zone. Number 3 is just a relief from standard for the deviation standards and adjustment processes. Number 4 addresses the 30-foot language for a new pole, whereas the FCC calls out 50. Given the topography of Issaquah, 30 feet for a new pole would be quite restrictive for the technologies we're trying to deploy to meet that coverage demand. Number 5 refers to the aesthetic requirements. 5G will not work under those design restrictions. Antennas need to be outside. They can be no more burdensome than the utility poles that are currently out there. They're not currently held to those standards. Those items are far bulkier and more burdensome than what we are proposing. And the last one is addresses the substantial change. It's just a misstatement. The code limits to 1 cab before it's substantial cabinet, for substantial change, where 6409, that limit would be 4 cabinets before it's considered substantial change. And everything we've talked about today is really just to align with the federal law. With that, Verizon's also very grateful for the opportunity to bring small cell technology to the city of Issaquah. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? No? Going once, going twice, and we'll go ahead and close public.
We're going to leave it open.
We're going to leave it open. Oh, we're going to go ahead and continue public comment until February 15th. 14th.
Is our next meeting?
Our next meeting. Okay.
Any other questions or dialogue this evening? I'd be more than happy to sit down.
I just had a quick question, like, as far as the technology, as it's going, are these shrouds, are these capabilities getting smaller?
Did any of you want to answer that question? Oh, Linda does.
I'll try to answer it. I mean, the truth is that the technology is still very much in the evolving stage, and a lot of the questions that you have are questions that we as industry representatives also have. Is the equipment, is the technology getting smaller? I guess part of the answer I can give is if you look at, for example, T-Mobile's design, that certainly is much smaller than you would see on your typical macro tower with, large panel antennas. It's difficult to answer the question completely because we don't know exactly where the technology is going, and right now we're focused on rolling out small cells. 5G is coming down the road, and the term 5G gets bandied about all the time, but I don't think that any of us is that clear on exactly what it's going to look like, or exactly what the equipment that will power the Internet of Things is going to look like. That's not a great answer, but that's all the information I have right now. I don't know if my colleagues have anything better than that, but.
Just want to quickly chime in that I appreciate Linda saying that, because I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think we talked about this before, that there's the short term and then there's the long term. The short term, they're doing all of these rollouts on existing technology and for their existing networks. And when all of this switches over to spitting out 5G, which, as you heard, that's not happening right now. These facilities could change and could look different. I think the idea is that they're generally going to still be these same types of things, but what that looks like, they don't have those. There are some cities that they say is rolling out 5G, and that term is being used. I think AT&T's got like a 5G Next or so. So there's some term, I don't know if you get, yeah. So there's something, and from the article I read, it's not real 5G, but I guess my point is there's the what you're going to see in the next few years and what you're going to see down the line. The franchises that are being authorized are going to cover probably both of those. The code certainly will cover both of those. So I think that there's that unknown that I think everybody can acknowledge and appreciate we're working with as we go.
Here's one I can answer. So you might have been referring to 5GE, which is 5G evolution. It's not true 5G. You may remember 3G, Edge, how all the technologies, different generations have different rungs up the ladder before they make the leap. So we have 4G, and then in between 4G and 5G, there's 5GE. 5GE is a form of carrier aggregation, so it can only be deployed in a place where there's 4 carriers already there, and they're on 4G. So I don't know the full details, because this is a very nice and cool program, but when it does get deployed, we have speeds of, if I remember my training right, it's about 200 to 400 megabits per second, and that was with 5GE. Actual true 5G, in the lab they can get up to 8 gigabits, which is crazy. That's faster than fiber you have in your home, but that's in a lab, and in the field we'll see what it turns out to be. So we're still rolling this out, and like I said, or like industry said, we're still trying to figure out what this is going to look like. And whenever I hear anyone say, oh, 10 years from now, who knows what it's going to look like? 10 years from now, where they're worried about what could happen, I say, I'm confused as to what's going to happen 3 years from now. Things are moving so fast. So the technology is changing extremely quickly, and for me, it's very difficult to judge what's going to happen even 5 years from now.
So all of this infrastructure you're putting in right now, these small cells, this is all for the 5G upcoming?
Actually, no. Currently the small cells are for 4G LTE equipment. For 5G will actually be rolled out for AT&T's equipment. I can't speak for my colleagues, but it'll be rolled out first on the big macro sites. And the small cells for 5G operate on a different spectrum, a higher frequency, higher frequency, and this is currently being auctioned off by the FCC. Yeah. There are currently auctions going on to use that frequency for the small cells. For 5G, it would be deployed on existing frequencies that we already have, and it would be on the big towers first.
I think from a technology standpoint, we're all looking forward to the benefits of 5G. From a customer experience standpoint, we're different than maybe South Seattle, like what Keith was saying, where they want you guys to come out and deploy it, and they don't really care what the poles look like. Here, we're a much more picky customer, and so I think like delivering a better customer experience to us to meet our needs, such as like design standards, would be a benefit to the carriers. Because your customer base would be much happier with you. So,
To be continued.
to be continued. Yes. All right. So, are we ready to move forward to the next topic? All right. So let's go ahead and we'll continue this on February 14th. And now we're going to go ahead and change over to the next thing on the docket, which is sign code update projects. We'll go ahead and if the public wants to adjourn, that's fine. And Emily is at the mic. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Emily Arteche, Senior Planner with Development Services, here to present, oops, let me just get the sign presentation going with here. Oh, slide,
You can use the bottom right.
bottom right.
Or you can use slideshow for beginning.
Slideshow up at the top.
Slideshow on the top is fine.
Oh,
Is that on the top?
bottom,
And keep going to the right.
right?
Next one? That one. That
That
one.
one, okay, thanks. Yeah, so my name's Emily Arteche, I'm Senior Planner with Development Services, and I'm here to present a new project that we are embarking on this year in 2019. It's the sign code update. And I'm also here with a small team of our staff to assist me in this project. So we've got Lucy here tonight and also Daniel Kenny from Ogden Murphy, who's been working with many jurisdictions, including ours, on sign code update. This first slide is very interesting. I don't know if any of you have tried this, but if you type in to Google Pictures, you get a lot of Google Pictures Issaquah. If you type in Google Pictures and then you type in the phrase Issaquah, this is what you get. You get a lot of really big signs, colorful signs of Issaquah. So it said to me that signs are a big thing. People have association with these particular signs when they think of Issaquah. And so this is it's a big deal. Anyway, that's why I put that sign up there. The purpose of this project is to legalize, streamline, and simplify the city's sign code. And that's why we're here today, because there's several different layers to work at. It's somewhat complicated, and let me explain. If you take a look at the city's sign code right now, this is just a funny pictorial, but you may get a little bit puzzled about how to try and maneuver through the sign code. There's more than one code, and when you look at it, you really have to know exactly where you're at and what code to apply, and then go figure it out. We do have lots of talented staff, and we've had a lot of sign permits issued, so it is moving along, but it's complicated. And so part of this project would be to simplify this process and make it more streamlined, so you didn't necessarily need to look through 3 sign codes to find your sign code permitting questions. So that's a big part of this project. This slide demonstrates just how many sign codes we have. We're working with the Issaquah Municipal Code, the Old Town Design Standards, and Central Issaquah. And so the goal would be to merge those together as best we can to come up with one sign code. Another part of this project is to legalize the sign code. Not too recently, back in 2015, there was a Supreme Court decision that came down with regards to regulating signs, in particular temporary signs. This particular case you may have heard of, it's called Reed versus Gilbert. And in that, the town of Gilbert, Arizona, was basically put through to Supreme Court on a decision regarding this particular sign from Good News Community. Good News Community didn't feel that it was fair for their sign to be regulated different than other stick signs, temporary signs that had more or greater allowances. And so what happened is that a Supreme Court decision came down that said, hey, you can't take a sign and regulate it by trying to read what's on the sign. Essentially, if you have to read the sign to know if your sign code, if that sign is in compliance with your sign code, then you're not compliant. You have to change your sign code. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. Because of that, this whole idea of content neutral evolved, requiring cities to go back and take a look at their sign codes and determine where in their sign codes you would need to make changes or amendments in order to make the standards content neutral. Not regulating what it says, but regulating more on size, number, location, that kind of thing. Any questions so far?
So maybe a good example. So just to make sure you guys are tracking what's going on here. So this is a church, right? And the church wanted a sign out in the right of way. And so if your jurisdiction says you can't have a sign in the right of way, but you allow political signs in the right of way or real estate signs in the right of way, you're now allowing signs based on content. And, First Amendment and the Supreme Court said you can't regulate based on what it says because that's a freedom of speech issue. And so this is the crux of why we're starting this. But of course, because we're complicated, we have multiple layers.
Right, I think the city has long dreamed to have one sign code. And it took a Reed Gilbert Supreme Court decision to really lend the hand to figure out, the urgency of taking a look at the sign code. And I think the city also didn't really have enough, many other projects were coming up and extremely busy and low staff. But now that Reed Gilbert is here, there's an opportunity for us to take a look at all the things that we've wanted to do and haven't had the time to do. But really, we are now in a place where we need to update the sign code, especially for Reed Gilbert.
So a question on that then. With that Supreme Court ruling, are we allowed to have different sets of code or different stipulations for something that's a temporary sign versus a permanent sign?
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more detail, but time, place, and manner, definitely, and how we choose to define these kinds of signs. So currently, for example, we would say, there's garage sale signs or political signs or directional signs that all have standards related to what you can put on your sign, and for how long you can put it up. So we're taking a look at redefining what those signs should be called and how to regulate them. Perhaps we regulate them based on the material they use, something flimsy, something lightweight, something that could be stuck in the ground with a sticker or a small piece of wood, that kind of thing. We're getting creative, but we're not the first. So thankfully, lots of other cities have gone through their sign code updates successfully, and Ogden Murphy has helped them, and they've done it in a way that the outcome's been very pleasing.
So Ogden Murphy has been dreaming of sign code.
I don't think anybody dreams of sign codes, and if you are, then I would.
You're at the right place.
I had no comment, but this is a fun project for the reasons of all the complexities that it has, not just the Reed Gilbert. So trying to keep it interesting, and I'm trying to keep excited about it in lots of ways. So just keeping along with a little bit of humor about time, place, and manner, if you've got Snoopy up there talking about this, the place is the night and it's stormy outside, we can regulate on time, place, and manner. We can't regulate on content. So it's going to require a fine, set of, a lot of refining of what we currently have to get to time, place, and manner and get away from content, but I think we'll be successful.
How do we define manner of signs?
I looked that word up. That's a really interesting question that you had. It's really quite broad. It's often a description, or a mechanism. It could be both. So it has a fairly vague definition to it. I didn't put it in my slide presentation, but maybe Lucy has an explanation.
I'm going to sneak up here for a minute. So I think, time could be a permanent sign versus a temporary sign. Place could be, Can it be on a building? Can it be in the right-of-way? Can it be on a window? And I'm going to springboard off your broad point to say that the manner, you know, its materials, its color, its how it's attached, its broad, its color. So I think it's all those other sort of aesthetic and design characteristics. And content, I think the important thing about content, which I think Emily has really described, but just since we're kind of summarizing here, it's both, we used to say you can't have telephone numbers on signs. We don't say that anymore. And we can't say that anymore. But the other piece is that we can't know what the regulations are for a sign based on the type of sign it is. So we can have a primary sign, we can have a window sign, we can have a secondary sign, but it's all those signs that Emily was listing, like garage sale, for sale, political signs. Those are all based, the regulations are based on the type of sign and its content.
Yeah, the simplest way to think about it is that if you have to read the sign, if you were the code compliance officer and you had to read the sign to determine the applicable standards that the city has adopted, then that's a no-no. That doesn't work. Then you haven't been successful in getting to content neutral.
Do we have codes in place today that address content specifically?
Yes, most of the sign code is content-based.
Such as, can you give me an example?
Explicitly, just in general terms, listing your name and your phone number, you know, the time, the days, those kinds of things that you could put, you know, you could put on your sign. So there's specific regulations for garage sale signs and yard sale signs about what you can put on there.
So in other words, what you're saying when you say content neutral is you're basically approving a blank sign.
You're
And
approving.
the customer can put on anything they want, any kind of message.
Right,
content,
yeah.
And you can't, there's no control.
Yeah, you're right. We laughed at that in my former jurisdiction where there's a banner that goes across the street, and we wondered if someone was going to use the Reed Gilbert decision to put something up there that was profane.
So can we object against things against obscenity? Is there at least that?
You know,
that is
I don't know.
fixed
That's
loophole?
going down a hypothetical, and
we need a lawyer.
we could go down and evaluate all kinds of options. Right now, we just want to take a look at what we have
Okay,
and convert those into content neutral and deal with whatever circumstances we need to at the time we need to deal with them, but not before that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a big concern with like hate speech.
Or like, I'm thinking of
It
like.
can't be the flavor of this Supreme Court ruling to allow hate speech on signs being posted around
True.
town.
I think we've got a comment here from our lawyer.
Think of like West Baptist Church, those guys.
Yeah.
So there are limitations under the First Amendment for what would be protected under the First Amendment. And I think, like you said, you know, we won't get into the details of those. I would just encourage you to, it's probably farther away from what you're comfortable with than you think it is. So it's not just our community doesn't want that up there. It's going to have to pass a pretty tough test under the First Amendment. And that's why you see things in protests at particular stores or businesses or on the news that you may feel is uncomfortable or disgusting or however you want to phrase it, but is allowed. So I just wanted to caution that, yes, you're going to protect against hate speech and profanity and inciting riots, things like that, but it's not going to be as easy as our community just doesn't really feel that way.
So I'd like to ask this is a hypothetical, but I think kind of addresses some of the concerns that we were talking about here. Let's say that we, looking out maybe 10 years from now with this new sign policy, we have a vape shop that wants to advertise smoking pot and vape products, and they want to put it on these real estate-like signs. They want to put them in front of a school or put them in right away. Is that something that we're saying we have to allow now? Because we can't control the content, just like a person can put a real estate sign in a neighborhood. Now we can have vape shops or other merchants put signs in different neighborhoods to advertise their businesses?
That's a good question. I don't have a specific answer. We do have policies and procedures in place right now for what we call mobile A-frame signs and permitting requirements for them and place where they can place them, especially in commercial zones. But it may raise a larger question about mobile A-frame signs previously used by real estate agents for open houses, and what we would want to do with trying to prevent, I suppose, or limit, someone else taking advantage of that open spot, if we don't call it an open house sign with content-based regulations. Yeah, definitely.
If you can put a
So-
sign there, you can put whatever you want on the
Well,
sign.
so, and maybe this is a question I don't know the answer, and maybe Emily and Daniel do. I mean, so right now, an off-premise sign is not allowed for a business. So that would address your concern that the vape shop or the pot shop, the cannabis shop, has a sign in front of the school, because that's off-premise. The question is off-premise for businesses a content issue
feels very
or
content.
something else?
Because isn't that the same thing as a real estate sign?
Yeah.
No, it's not. I mean, because the real estate sign is not advertising the realtor's office, right? It's a property that's for sale. I'm going to go sit down because I don't know what I'm talking about.
I'm not sure I know exactly, but what you're bringing up is the kinds of issues that we're going to have to deal with. So if they tried to place it on the school property, they would, the school would have control over, I'm sorry, my earring's hooked on my scarf and it's driving me crazy. Thank you.
Torture.
I have my
Or
helpmate.
malfunction.
Yes. So a piece of property gets to control what is on that property. And so a school could say, we are not going to allow any signs from someone else on that property. The right-of-way is going to be a big question that we think we're going to end up talking about, because if ownership and who we allow into the right-of-way, once we allow certain things into the right-of-way, then we have to, allow everything into the right-of-way. And so that, I think that's why we're trying to introduce this topic tonight, is to make sure that we know the issues that you guys are particularly concerned about. We don't have the answers. We are just starting down this road. And we're trying to test some of these, help educate you on the things that we're trying to accomplish and that we see as challenges, get some initial feedback from you, and then we're going to go dig into these, because we know that, for instance, opening up the right-of-way to everyone being able to put any sign they want anywhere would not be consistent with the way the community has handled signs. And so we know that that's already one area in which we're going to have to invest some time.
Okay. The reason why I brought that up, I just envisioned yard work signs, tree trimming signs, nail salon signs, and all of a sudden our community is going to be sign infested with really cheap chintzy signs, and all of a sudden we've got a dilemma, because a real estate sign is a legitimate sign. You're trying to sell someone's real estate, and that sign directs people to a location. But now we're saying that we can't control the content. So if we don't allow the salon signs and the yard work signs, then we're going to also eliminate the real estate signs, which is going to negatively impact the real estate companies and customers, which would be the homeowners.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's as far, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think we have the answer yet.
Yeah, there's some risk for sure, and things will change, and other cities have survived. So I would ask you to refrain from doom and gloom and know that we can be successful, and we're going to have to open ourselves up to more risk for sure. And we will come back with recommendations for you to review as the year goes on when we address these issues.
Okay, I have a different direction question then. When you say we can't address content, does that limit our ability to, basically the idea of a blank sign, does that limit our ability to address design such as color or the lighting on the sign?
No, we can address that.
That's
Yeah, and
Fantastic.
Yeah, in fact, we've got some ideas about design guidelines coming in and playing a more significant role in the city's sign code. They have a very minor role right now with they're more like suggestions as opposed to guidelines that we could adhere to. So it's also an opportunity to beef up our look and our feel with something more concrete for planners to use as they administer the code.
So if I understand this right too, we can still impose certain criteria, like denying something like the right-of-way. It just can't be on content. Even if you were to
We
do
could
like
say
a
the right
city-
of way is not open for anybody, right? We could if we wanted to.
Technically,
And-
but just as long as it's not
But it wouldn't,
discriminatory.
it would, he's saying, no, we can't do that. I mean, I suppose you could regulate place, let's just say that. You could regulate place. But the right-of-way's been the traditional place for political signage and yard sale signs and free speech and things like that.
But kind of like to Daniel's point, if you do it for one, you do it for all. And it's like you said, it's going to be probably not in our comfort zone.
No doom and gloom,
No doom and gloom, no, not at all.
We will figure it out. We will figure it out. Other places have been successful.
Got a legal question. Legal question. I don't know if this is going to get me in hot water or not, but when it comes to enforcement, can we choose to enforce? And if the problem becomes, in other words, if we say it's illegal to do this, but we just don't enforce it because it hasn't been an issue, and then all of a sudden it's an issue, can we turn around and enforce it?
You can enforce it. If it's against the law, you can enforce it. Do you want to?
We missed it.
Yeah.
Missed the idea.
I'm not sure how you want me to answer that. You should enforce your code uniformly for everybody at all times.
Perfect.
I think you're thinking all federal government, right? Exercising their certain rights to.
So what's the next step then?
Oh, let me get through some other slides. So I think we've talked about these a bit more, but we've talked about lighting and not lighting. These are things that you can continue to
Nice.
regulate. You can create standards for them. So we've got a lot of room to work with. It's not all off the table. And we've talked about these too. Some of the issues that we know are going to be complicated right off the bat are temporary signs, definitions, redefining what political sign really means now, for example, and looking at our exceptions or exemptions and finding out how to simplify those, how to reword them, making sure they tie back in to the definitions that we're reworking, that there's good continuity. But when it comes right down to it, we want to take the maze and we want to have a straight line through it so we get to easier permitting, easier applications, and standardized compliance. Public involvement will be a big part of this project. We're going to be leading off this first quarter with some stakeholder presentations, designing a web page, which is actually up right now, some comment forms for people to submit online and at public meetings. There's an opportunity for using the Notify Me part of the city's webpage, where if they wanted to get updates, they'd get email news flashes sent directly to their emails. We're going to have to work with the city's council committees, in particular Land and Shore, and then the city council. And then the next steps, project presentation and discussion, continued public meeting and outreach, continued meetings with you, commission reviews and public hearings, committee review, council decision, and implementation. And there's the location for the city's webpage on signs right now at the bottom. Any other questions?
Not at this moment.
Questions? All right.
Good luck.
I have one more announcement for you all. Remember, the Parks Department is redoing or updating or relooking at, reimagining the policies in the Park Strategic Plan that you asked them to do last year. They are forming an ad hoc committee to look at these goals and policies, and they wanted to know if anyone from PPC would want to join them in that endeavor. So I told Jen Fink that I would ask you all tonight. If you think about that and you want to be involved, let me know. You can email me and say, I think I've got the time to do this, and I will let her know.
Do they have a proposed frequency for meetings?
No, I asked that. She just spoke to them. I think their meeting was this Monday. And I haven't seen her since to see if they decided if they're meeting once a month or if they're, how they're going to do it.
Have they chosen a day? Is it gonna
No,
be Monday?
I asked all these questions
Okay.
because I said my folks are going to want to know, like specifically, it's Tuesday at whenever, but she didn't know yet. But I could ask her again and then send that out to see if that would help anybody make a decision on if they'd want to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great, thank
Can do
you.
that.
So do we need to open this up for public comment?
The sign code, no, it was
No,
just a presentation.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Awesome presentation. We had a lot of questions.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We're all
Emily.
set. And the
Lucy?
next meeting, hopefully, are you four available for February 14th?
Yes.
Good, because it's getting, now that AJ is on the Transportation Committee, it's going to be harder to get a quorum.
Ellen, what a day to choose to have.
Yes.
How do we, what are we doing about the vacancy on this commission? Do we have to wait until
That'll come-
2022, or?
Yeah, that'll come when they advertise all the open positions.
Okay,
But that will
We would fill
come up
that and the,
in 2019. We can't
right, we have
appoint
to
somebody.
wait. We can't appoint somebody early, okay,
right, we would do that in May.
okay.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting here at 8:16, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Well done, Ron.